Okay, Ton, it's all yours. What do you want?
Oh, first of all, thank you very much for your responses because, it's very important. I spent years being left out of conversations, and then suddenly being invited to one is super exciting, first of all. But something that I wanted to talk about was actually MacLow and his performance, right?
Yeah. Do you
And the
mean a
conversation
vocabulary
about
for Peter
grief.
Innisfree-Moore?
Yes, absolutely.
Got it.
So I feel like because English is not my first language, first of all, right? And I didn't hear a single word that was being said in that performance. It was just noises for me. But I think that it's almost like aided me weirdly, because when I heard it, I couldn't hear it more for like than 20 seconds. I got overwhelmed really badly after all. There's just so much happening. But the first thought I had when I listened to it was, oh, it's a grief hellscape.
It's a what?
And it's a grief hellscape.
Got it.
I didn't know who it was for, and I didn't know what happened, but I knew immediately that the person died. I didn't need to know the meaning. I didn't need to hear the words, but I knew that the person died, and I knew that was terrible, and it was soul crushing. And something that you had, I remember that was a conversation about this particular performance as an avoidance of talking about grief.
Yes.
And I strongly disagree with that, because this is how my process of grieving works. When something terrible happens, some sort of loss, my thought process almost gets reduced to syllables and sounds. And this is all I can understand in that moment, that when nothing makes sense anymore. It's just syllables, sounds, maybe words and phrases if I'm lucky. And so to me, that piece was extremely evocative because I could see it. It was almost like letting grief be embodied, because sounds and words and noises and music are frequencies and also waves. They're physical. And it's such a cool way to literally physically embody grief without actually necessarily saying anything super profound or poetic. It becomes poetic because it's so embodied and physical.
Sound is physical, and if we can somehow get ourselves in a position of hearing words as sounds, then we're more closely relating to words, to language as a physical thing.
Yeah, and we also, if we let it happen, I feel like we experience grief through us and let it go through us freer.
Yeah. That's great. Ton, I just feel like what you just said, it made me go for the recording of MacLow, but I think then you started talking about words as sounds and the way you hear them, the way you personally hear them, and how you listen to MacLow.
Yeah.
And it took me to the John Cage quote about making English less understandable. I think I want to read it, but I want to read especially the second part of it, which is about what you've just been saying. So let me do that, and let me ask a couple of my colleagues to respond to that. So how about Gabe and Anna responding to the Cage in relation to what Ton just said?
Sure.
I let it be known to my friends and even strangers as I was wandering around the country that what was interesting me was making English less understandable. Because when it's understandable, well, people control one another and poetry disappears. And I was saying to my friend Norman O. Brown, and he said, syntax, which is what makes things understandable, is the army, the arrangement of the army. So what we're doing when we make language ununderstandable is we're demilitarizing it so that we can do our living. Here's the part that's really relevant. It's a transition from language to music, certainly. It's bewildering at first, but it's extremely pleasurable as time goes on. And that's what I'm up to. His work, Empty Words, his piece, Empty Words begins by omitting sentences, has only phrases, words, syllables, and letters. The second part omits the phrases, has only words, syllables, and letters. The third part omits the words, has only syllables and letters. And the last part has nothing but letters and sounds. So, Anna, first, your thought, and then Gabe?
I think the way that maybe we can connect what Cage is saying with what MacLow is doing in A Vocabulary for Peter Innisfree Moore is that because it's an elegy, I would argue that grief itself is not something that's understandable. And like the pain of losing someone is not something that you can like understand in language. So actually it might be, even though like the experience of listening to it can be really challenging, like again, losing someone itself is challenging. That we can't necessarily do justice to the way that we really feel by making things beautiful, right? The experience of loss is not a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Gabe, your thought on this?
Yeah, I have a long answer, but I think it's a good one. Okay. I think about loss as a change in the relationship between a subject and an object, which might be too vague for some people, or maybe too easy. But the reason I think that is because that kind of loss definition encompasses both I lost my pen and I lost my father. You know, both of those things are about a change between you and the object that you have lost and the relationship that's now changed, which means that loss automatically is a problem of reference. I can no longer refer to the thing that I lost in the same way that I used to. I can say my pen, but it's no longer here where I thought it was. Or I can say my dad, but I can no longer really refer to that thing in the same way. This is why grief and loss have such a strong relationship to the unsayable, or to the too difficult to say, or the I can't exactly find my words for it. Because in and of itself, the problem is that your words are not really doing their job in the way you expected them to before the loss happened. Mm-hmm. So that's what's particularly productive about the MacLow thing. And I think that's basically what Tan is saying. MacLow is basically making a kind of language relationship that captures what's so difficult about loss in the first place, that it's a problem of language. And I think Cage is thinking less about grief or loss necessarily, but thinking about the productivity of making language that kind of difficulty, and the productivity of embodying that kind of difficulty in language and seeing where it takes you on the political front. So
he's also interested in eliminating the natural or almost natural control that happens when you put a subject with an object. The subject generally tries to control the object, at least as a matter of perception or naming with words. Sure. And so I think that Cage is trying to demilitarize language by creating what we might call intersubjectivity, or basically making the subject and object unrecognizable as such. And he's seeking pleasure in that, really, so he's not responding to pain so much. Tan, can we turn back to you for a final thought on all of this?
Sure.
And then we'll say good morning or good night to you?
It's both good morning and good night.
Yes.
Well, I'm just floored by what Gabe said, actually, because it is true, I think, that we can't refer to the thing that we lost in the same way anymore, and this is what makes it so difficult, and this is what makes this piece so touching, I guess. And I've seen a lot of people in the comments and in the chat and on the forums saying that it is very sensory, like a lot, and that's true. But grief also is a lot when you go through it. And so, especially like when you want to refer to someone and you can't, and the person is not there and will never be there anymore, for whatever reason, that for a lot of people is, worse than the loss itself, maybe. That the process of losing. And I think it's really well said, Gabe. I really loved it.